What if I told you that the moment you stop trying to control reality and start trusting the deepest laws of the universe, your entire world begins to reorganize itself in ways that would make even the most skeptical scientist question everything they thought they knew about existence? Right now, as you're watching this video, something extraordinary is happening. Your consciousness is interfacing with information that could fundamentally alter how you experience reality itself. This isn't motivational speaking or wishful thinking. This is about understanding quantum mechanics at such a profound level that your nervous system begins operating from a completely different set of principles. Scientists at major universities have documented cases where individuals who fully embrace quantum principles experience what can only be described as reality glitches, sudden manifestations of desired outcomes, impossible synchronicities that defy statistical probability, physical healing that medical professionals cannot explain through conventional means. These aren't isolated incidents or coincidences. They're the predictable result of consciousness operating in full alignment with the quantum field. But here's what most people don't understand about quantum physics. It's not just describing how particles behave in laboratories. It's revealing the fundamental structure of reality itself. And when you truly comprehend this, when you move beyond intellectual understanding into embodied knowing, something shifts in your field that changes everything. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the specific quantum principles that govern reality creation, witness documented cases of impossible transformations that occur when people fully trust these principles, and learn the exact process for aligning your consciousness with quantum mechanics so completely that your external world has no choice but to reflect your internal coherence. But first, let me share something that will completely reframe how you think about possibility itself. Dr. Amit Goswami, quantum physicist and professor emeritus at the University of Oregon, spent decades studying consciousness and quantum mechanics. What he discovered changed not just his understanding of physics, but his entire experience of being alive. He found that consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness. This isn't philosophy. This is measurable science. When consciousness observes quantum possibilities, it literally collapses infinite potential into singular reality. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every moment of focused attention is an act of observation that shapes the quantum field around you. Most people go their entire lives never realizing they're constantly creating reality through the quality of their observation. Think about this carefully. Right now, as you process these words, your consciousness is collapsing quantum possibilities into the specific reality you're experiencing. The fact that you're here, absorbing this particular information at this precise moment, isn't random. It's the result of countless quantum observations that led to this exact intersection of possibilities. But there's something even more profound happening. When you fully trust quantum mechanics, when you stop fighting the process and start cooperating with it, you begin to experience what physicists call quantum coherence. This is a state where your thoughts, emotions, and intentions align so perfectly that you become a coherent transmitter of specific frequencies into the quantum field. Let me tell you about Sarah, a documentary filmmaker who discovered this principle during the most challenging period of her life. She'd been struggling for 3 years to fund a project about environmental restoration. Every traditional approach had failed. Investors weren't interested. Crowdfunding campaigns fell short. She was days away from abandoning her dream entirely. Then she encountered quantum physics research about consciousness and reality creation. Not the popular interpretations, but the actual scientific findings about how observation affects quantum systems. Instead of continuing to push against circumstances, she decided to conduct an experiment. She would trust quantum mechanics completely for 30 days and observe what happened to her reality. The shift began within hours. Instead of desperately seeking funding, she started operating from the assumption that the perfect resources were already moving toward her project. She stopped checking her bank account obsessively. she stopped crafting persuasive emails to potential investors. Instead, she focused entirely on the feeling of her documentary already being complete and making its intended impact. Within 2 weeks, she received an unexpected call from a production company that had somehow obtained an early treatment of her project. They offered full funding plus distribution guarantees. When she asked how they'd found her work, they couldn't provide a clear explanation. The treatment had appeared on someone's desk with no record of how it got there. This isn't an isolated case. Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has documented hundreds of similar occurrences. When individuals align their consciousness with quantum principles rather than fighting against them, reality begins responding in ways that appear impossible from a classical physics perspective. The key insight is this. Quantum mechanics reveals that particles exist in superposition until they're observed. They exist in all possible states simultaneously until consciousness collapses them into specific realities. Your life circumstances operate according to the same principles. All possible versions of your future exist simultaneously in the quantum field until your consciousness collapses them into singular experience through sustained observation. Most people unconsciously observe limitation, scarcity, and struggle. They focus their attention on what's wrong, what's missing, what's not working. Through this consistent observation, they collapse quantum possibilities into realities that match their focus. They're not victims of circumstances. They're unconscious creators of circumstances. But when you understand this process and begin working with it intentionally, everything changes. You stop trying to manipulate external conditions and start focusing on internal coherence. You realize that the quantum field doesn't respond to your words or your actions. It responds to your frequency, your vibration, your state of being. This is where trust becomes crucial. Not blind faith, but informed confidence in how quantum systems actually operate. When you trust the process completely, you stop interfering with it. You stop checking for evidence every 5 minutes. You stop questioning whether it's working. Instead, you maintain coherent observation of your desired reality until the quantum field has no choice but to reflect that reality back to you. Dr. Joe Dispenza has spent years researching this phenomenon. His studies show measurable changes in brainwave patterns, gene expression, and electromagnetic fields when individuals learn to observe desired realities with sustained coherence. These aren't subtle shifts. They're dramatic transformations that occur within weeks of consistent practice. The process begins with understanding what quantum physicists call the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, the act of observation literally determines what becomes real. Before observation, particles exist as waves of probability. After observation, they become definite particles with specific properties. Your consciousness is the observer, and your attention is the force that collapses possibilities into realities. But here's where it gets fascinating. The observer effect doesn't just apply to subatomic particles. It applies to every level of reality, including your life circumstances. When you observe poverty, you collapse quantum possibilities into experiences of limitation. When you observe abundance, you collapse possibilities into experiences of prosperity. The field doesn't judge which observation is better. It simply reflects whatever you consistently focus upon with emotional intensity. This is why traditional goal setting often fails. People visualize desired outcomes while emotionally dwelling in current limitations. They're sending mixed signals to the quantum field. Their conscious minds are observing success while their subconscious minds are observing failure. The field responds to the dominant signal, which is usually the unconscious emotional state. Quantum trust requires something different. It requires observing your desired reality with such consistency and emotional coherence that doubt becomes impossible. Not because you've convinced yourself of something false, but because you've aligned with something true at the deepest level of reality's structure. Consider quantum entanglement, another phenomenon that reveals how consciousness and reality are interconnected. When particles become entangled, they remain connected across infinite distances. Changes to one particle instantly affect its entangled partner, regardless of space and time. Your consciousness can become entangled with desired outcomes in exactly the same way. When you focus on a specific possibility with sustained attention and emotional alignment, you create quantum entanglement between your consciousness and that possibility. The more coherent your focus, the stronger the entanglement becomes. Eventually, changes in your internal state begin manifesting as changes in your external circumstances, not through force or manipulation, but through quantum correlation. This is what happened to Marcus, a software engineer who applied these principles to career advancement. For months, he'd been applying to senior positions at major tech companies without success. His resume was impressive, his skills were current, but something wasn't clicking. Then he learned about quantum entanglement and consciousness. Instead of continuing to apply desperately to every opening, he chose one specific company and position that felt perfectly aligned with his vision. He spent 20 minutes each morning in a state of quantum coherence, feeling himself already working in that environment, already contributing to projects that excited him, already receiving the recognition he deserved. The key wasn't visualization. It was the feeling state he maintained throughout each day. He moved through his current job as if he were already the senior engineer he wanted to become. He made decisions from that elevated identity. He spoke with colleagues from that expanded perspective. He was embodying the frequency of his desired reality rather than hoping it would eventually materialize. 3 weeks later, he received a LinkedIn message from a recruiter at his target company. They'd seen his profile and wanted to discuss a position that wasn't even publicly posted yet. The role was exactly what he'd been focusing on, with responsibilities and compensation that exceeded his original expectations. When he asked how they'd found him among millions of profiles, the recruiter mentioned that his profile had somehow appeared at the top of their search results, despite not matching their usual search parameters. From a quantum perspective, this makes perfect sense. His coherent focus had created entanglement between his consciousness and that specific opportunity. If these principles are resonating with you, if something inside you is recognizing these truths as more than just interesting concepts, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these quantum consciousness insights reach others who are ready to understand how reality actually operates at its deepest levels. But understanding quantum entanglement is just the beginning. There's another quantum principle that, when fully trusted, creates even more dramatic shifts in experienced reality. It's called superposition, and it holds the key to accessing infinite possibilities simultaneously rather than being limited to linear progression through singular timelines. Most people think they're living one life, making one choice at a time, moving through reality in a straight line from past to future. But quantum physics reveals something that will shatter this illusion completely. According to superposition, you're not living one life. You're living all possible lives simultaneously. Every choice you could make, every path you could take, every version of yourself you could become exists right now in the quantum field, waiting for your consciousness to collapse it into experience. This isn't metaphysical speculation. This is documented science. In quantum laboratories around the world, particles demonstrate superposition daily. They exist in multiple states at once until observation forces them to choose a single state. Your life operates according to the same principles, but on a scale so vast that most people never recognize the process happening. When you fully trust superposition, something extraordinary occurs. You stop seeing yourself as trapped in current circumstances and start recognizing yourself as having access to infinite versions of reality. You begin to understand that limitation is just one possibility among countless others. and you have the power to shift between possibilities through conscious observation. Let me share the story of Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroscientist who discovered this principle during her own health crisis. She'd been diagnosed with a degenerative condition that medical experts said was irreversible. Traditional treatments offered minimal hope. Her prognosis was decline followed by increasing disability. But Eleanor understood quantum mechanics from her research background. She knew that particles could tunnel through energy barriers that classical physics said were impenetrable. She wondered if consciousness could tunnel through seemingly impossible circumstances in the same way. Instead of accepting the singular timeline her diagnosis suggested, she began operating from superposition. She acknowledged that one possible version of herself would experience progressive decline, but she also recognized that infinite other versions existed where healing occurred, where her body found pathways to restoration that current medical understanding couldn't explain. The key was maintaining simultaneous awareness of all possibilities without collapsing into the limitation timeline. This required extraordinary mental discipline. Every time fear or doubt attempted to force her into the decline possibility, she would consciously return to superposition, holding space for all potential outcomes while emotionally aligning with the healing timelines. Within 6 months, her symptoms began reversing. Medical tests showed improvements that her doctors couldn't explain through any known mechanism. When they asked what she'd changed in her treatment approach, she struggled to provide answers they could understand. How do you explain quantum superposition to medical professionals trained in classical causality? Today, 3 years later, Eleanor shows no signs of the degenerative condition. Her case has been studied by researchers investigating spontaneous remission, but their classical framework prevents them from recognizing the quantum principles at work. They're looking for biochemical explanations when the actual mechanism operates at the level of consciousness, interfacing with quantum possibilities. This is what happens when you truly trust superposition. You stop being limited by what appears possible from your current vantage point and start accessing what's actually possible from the quantum field of infinite potential. You realize that every limitation you've accepted was just one possibility among countless others. But trusting superposition requires releasing attachment to how outcomes must unfold. Most people want to control which possibility manifests and exactly when it happens. This attachment actually prevents superposition from operating freely. It's like trying to observe a quantum particle while simultaneously demanding it be in a specific location. The observation itself interferes with the natural quantum process. True quantum trust means allowing the field to determine which possibility serves your highest evolution, even if it's different from what your limited perspective thought was optimal. Sometimes the healing timeline involves different circumstances than you expected. Sometimes the abundance timeline manifests through opportunities you never considered. The intelligence operating through quantum mechanics sees connections and possibilities that individual consciousness cannot perceive. This is where another quantum principle becomes crucial: non-locality. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, but modern physics has confirmed that quantum systems can affect each other instantaneously across infinite space. When you align with non-locality, you begin to understand that everything in your reality is interconnected at the quantum level. Your thoughts don't just affect your local environment. They ripple through the non-local field, creating changes in circumstances and relationships that may be physically distant, but quantumly connected. This is why people often report that when they shift their internal state, their external world transforms in ways that seem impossibly coordinated. Take the case of Jennifer, a small business owner whose company was failing despite her best efforts. She'd tried every conventional strategy: marketing campaigns, product improvements, cost reductions, team restructuring. Nothing worked. Revenue continued declining, and bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Then she learned about quantum non-locality and decided to experiment with it. Instead of continuing to focus on the problems in her business, she began aligning her consciousness with the non-local field of infinite intelligence. She trusted that solutions existed beyond her current awareness, and that the field could orchestrate circumstances in ways her individual mind couldn't plan or predict. The shift wasn't about passive waiting. It was about active alignment with non-local intelligence while remaining open to unexpected pathways. She maintained focus on her business thriving while releasing attachment to specific methods of recovery. Within days, synchronicities began cascading. A former colleague mentioned her company to someone who turned out to be seeking exactly the services she provided. A competitor unexpectedly offered to partner on a project that generated significant revenue. A customer shared her work with their network, leading to contracts she never could have pursued directly. Each opportunity seemed unrelated to the others, but from a quantum perspective, they were all expressions of non-local correlation. Her consciousness had entangled with the field of business success, and the field was responding by reorganizing circumstances across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The most fascinating aspect was the timing. All these developments occurred within a 3-week period after months of struggle. From a classical viewpoint, this looked like miraculous coincidence. From a quantum viewpoint, it was the predictable result of consciousness aligning with non-local intelligence and trusting the process completely. This is what quantum non-locality makes possible. When you stop trying to control outcomes through local action alone and start trusting the field to coordinate circumstances non-locally, reality becomes far more responsive and creative than individual effort could ever achieve. But there's another quantum principle that takes this even further. It's called quantum coherence, and when you understand how to maintain it consistently, your entire reality begins operating like a unified field rather than a collection of separate, unrelated circumstances. Quantum coherence occurs when all elements of a system vibrate in perfect synchronization. Instead of individual particles behaving randomly, they begin functioning as one coordinated whole. When your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and actions achieve coherence, you become a unified field that interfaces with reality from a completely different level of power. Most people live in quantum decoherence. Their thoughts point in one direction, while their emotions pull in another. Their conscious desires conflict with their unconscious fears. Their actions contradict their stated intentions. This internal chaos creates external chaos because the quantum field receives mixed signals and reflects back confused results. But when you achieve quantum coherence, when every aspect of your being aligns around a singular frequency, something remarkable happens. You stop being a collection of conflicting signals and become a coherent transmitter of specific outcomes. The field responds to this coherence with matching coherence in your external circumstances. Dr. James had been struggling with this concept for years. As a research scientist, he understood quantum mechanics intellectually, but he couldn't seem to apply it effectively to his personal life. His career had stagnated despite his qualifications. His relationships felt unfulfilling despite his efforts. He was living in constant decoherence, wanting one thing while unconsciously creating another. The breakthrough came when he realized that coherence wasn't something he could think his way into. It required aligning every level of his being, not just his conscious mind. He had to identify and transform the unconscious patterns that were contradicting his conscious intentions. This meant examining his deepest beliefs about worthiness, success, and possibility. It meant recognizing how his emotional patterns were sabotaging his stated goals. It meant aligning his daily actions with his highest vision, rather than his habitual reactions. The process took months of consistent inner work, but when coherence finally clicked, his external world transformed almost instantly. Research opportunities that had been closed to him suddenly opened. Collaborative relationships developed with colleagues who previously seemed indifferent. His work gained recognition from institutions that had ignored him for years. The shift wasn't gradual, it was quantum. One day he was struggling against circumstances that seemed immovable, and the next day those same circumstances were actively supporting his advancement. This is what quantum coherence makes possible when you trust it completely. When you achieve coherence between your conscious desires and unconscious programming, between your thoughts and emotions, between your intentions and actions, you become what quantum physicists call a coherent system. And coherent systems have access to possibilities that incoherent systems cannot even perceive. This is the deepest level of quantum trust. Not just believing that consciousness affects reality, but embodying such complete alignment that you become an undivided field of creative potential. When this happens, the distinction between inner and outer reality begins dissolving, and you discover that you've always been both the observer and the observed, the creator and the creation, the question and the answer. But achieving this level of coherence requires understanding one more quantum principle that most people never encounter, even in advanced physics courses. It's the principle that explains why some people can access quantum possibilities effortlessly, while others struggle despite having all the right information. This principle is called quantum resonance, and it's the missing piece that transforms intellectual understanding into lived reality. Most people approach quantum mechanics like they're learning a foreign language, trying to memorize concepts and techniques without ever becoming fluent in the actual frequency of quantum consciousness itself. Quantum resonance occurs when your personal frequency matches the vibrational signature of the reality you're seeking to experience. It's not enough to understand superposition intellectually. You must resonate with it at the cellular level. It's not sufficient to comprehend non-locality as a concept. You must embody it as a lived truth. Think of it like tuning a radio. You can know everything about radio waves, understand the physics of electromagnetic transmission, even build sophisticated receivers. But until you tune to the exact frequency of the station you want to hear, you'll only get static. Quantum resonance is the precise tuning that allows you to receive the reality signals that match your desired experience. Most people are broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Part of them resonates with abundance, while another part vibrates with scarcity. One aspect of their consciousness aligns with healing, while another maintains patterns of illness. This creates quantum interference, where conflicting frequencies cancel each other out instead of amplifying the desired outcome. But when you achieve pure resonance, when every aspect of your being vibrates at the same quantum frequency, something extraordinary occurs. You don't just access quantum possibilities, you become a quantum possibility. You embody the very frequency that your desired reality requires to manifest. Consider the case of Robert, a musician who spent decades struggling to break through in the industry. He had talent, dedication, and comprehensive knowledge of the business. He understood networking, marketing, and all the conventional strategies for career advancement. Yet success remained elusive despite years of effort. Everything changed when Robert discovered quantum resonance. Instead of continuing to push against industry obstacles, he began tuning his entire being to the frequency of musical success. This wasn't visualization or positive thinking. It was a complete recalibration of his energetic signature to match the vibrational reality where his music was already reaching its intended audience. The process required him to identify every aspect of his consciousness that wasn't resonating with success. His doubts about worthiness, his resentment toward industry gatekeepers, his fear of criticism, his attachment to specific outcomes. Each of these discordant frequencies was creating interference with his desired reality. Over several months, Robert systematically aligned every level of his being with the frequency of accomplished musicianship. He stopped seeing himself as someone trying to become successful and started embodying the energetic signature of someone whose success was already established in the quantum field. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, opportunities began manifesting that seemed to come from nowhere. A producer heard his music through a series of connections so unlikely that tracing the path became impossible. His songs began resonating with audiences in ways that surprised even him. Record labels that had previously ignored his submissions suddenly expressed interest. But the most fascinating aspect was how natural it all felt. The success didn't seem like something external that finally arrived. It felt like something internal that was finally being recognized. This is the hallmark of quantum resonance. When you're truly aligned with a frequency, manifesting outcomes that match that frequency feels effortless and inevitable. The key insight Robert discovered was that quantum resonance isn't something you achieve once and maintain forever. It's a dynamic process that requires constant fine-tuning as you evolve and expand. Each new level of success required him to adjust his resonance to match even higher possibilities. This reveals another crucial aspect of quantum trust. The field isn't static. It's constantly evolving, presenting new possibilities and higher potentials. When you trust quantum mechanics completely, you remain flexible and responsive to these evolutionary currents rather than rigidly attached to specific outcomes. Dr. Amit Goswami's research reveals that consciousness doesn't just observe quantum possibilities, it participates in their creation. When you achieve perfect resonance with a desired reality, you're not just accessing something that already existed. You're collaborating with the quantum field to birth entirely new possibilities that emerge from the intersection of your consciousness and infinite potential. This is where quantum trust becomes truly revolutionary. You're not just trusting that desired outcomes will manifest. You're trusting your capacity to participate in the creation of realities that transcend anything you could have imagined from your limited perspective. But achieving quantum resonance requires understanding something that most spiritual and manifestation teachings completely miss. It's not about eliminating negative thoughts or maintaining perfect positivity. It's about achieving what quantum physicists call phase coherence, where all aspects of your consciousness align regardless of their apparent polarity. In quantum systems, coherence can include seemingly opposite states. Particles can spin in multiple directions simultaneously while maintaining perfect coherence. Similarly, your consciousness can hold space for uncertainty while maintaining absolute faith. Acknowledge current limitations while embodying infinite possibility. Feel fear while taking courageous action. This paradoxical coherence is what allows quantum trust to operate effectively in real-world circumstances. You don't need to eliminate doubt to achieve quantum resonance. You need to include doubt within a larger field of coherent possibility. You don't need to suppress fear to access quantum outcomes. You need to align fear with the evolutionary intelligence that uses all emotions as navigation tools. Maria discovered this principle during her recovery from a severe accident that doctors said would leave her permanently disabled. Traditional approaches to healing focused on eliminating negative thoughts and maintaining unwavering positivity. But these methods created internal conflict because part of her was genuinely afraid and uncertain about her recovery. The breakthrough came when she learned to achieve coherence with all aspects of her experience. Instead of fighting her fears about the future, she included them within a larger resonance of trust in her body's quantum healing capacity. Instead of suppressing doubt about medical prognoses, she held doubt and faith in phase coherence, allowing both to contribute to her overall alignment with healing possibilities. This approach felt much more authentic and sustainable than forced positivity. She could acknowledge the genuine challenges of her situation while simultaneously resonating with timelines where complete recovery occurred. She could feel afraid about certain outcomes while maintaining coherent focus on preferred possibilities. The results were extraordinary. Her recovery progressed far beyond medical expectations. But more importantly, the process itself became a demonstration of how quantum consciousness can operate effectively in challenging circumstances without requiring the suppression of authentic human responses. This is perhaps the most liberating aspect of true quantum trust. You don't need to become someone different to access quantum possibilities. You need to become more authentically yourself while aligning that authenticity with the deepest principles of how reality actually operates. Quantum resonance reveals that every aspect of your human experience, including the parts you've been taught to reject or overcome, contains valuable information for navigating quantum realities. Your sensitivity might be the very quality that allows you to detect subtle quantum signals. Your skepticism might be the discernment needed to distinguish between genuine quantum phenomena and wishful thinking. When you achieve true quantum resonance, you discover that consciousness and quantum mechanics aren't separate subjects that occasionally interact. They're different aspects of the same fundamental reality. Consciousness is quantum mechanics becoming aware of itself. Quantum mechanics is consciousness exploring its creative potential through apparent physicality. This recognition transforms everything about how you engage with quantum principles. You stop trying to use quantum mechanics to get what you want and start recognizing yourself as quantum mechanics expressing what you are. You stop attempting to manipulate quantum fields and start embodying the quantum field that's creating your experience. But there's one more quantum principle that takes this understanding to its ultimate conclusion. It's the principle that explains why some people can maintain quantum resonance effortlessly, while others struggle to sustain it, even when they understand all the mechanics perfectly. This principle is called quantum entanglement with source, and it's the difference between trying to create from individual consciousness and discovering yourself as an expression of the infinite consciousness that creates everything. When you achieve this level of quantum trust, you're no longer attempting to align with quantum principles. You recognize yourself as the quantum principle through which infinite possibilities express themselves into manifest reality. The implications of this recognition are staggering. It means that every limitation you've experienced was actually infinite possibility appearing to be constrained until you developed sufficient resonance to perceive and embody larger realities. It means that every challenge was consciousness creating opportunities for its own expansion and evolution. When you trust quantum mechanics at this depth, when you recognize yourself as both the observer and the quantum field being observed, something unprecedented becomes possible. You don't just experience quantum phenomena occasionally. You become a consistent expression of quantum consciousness, where impossible outcomes become natural expressions of who you actually are. This is where we're heading next, into the territory where quantum physics stops being something you study and becomes something you embody so completely that your very existence becomes a demonstration of consciousness, exploring its infinite creative potential through the apparent limitations and possibilities of physical reality. The question isn't whether you can trust quantum mechanics. The question is whether you're ready to discover what you actually are when quantum trust becomes the foundation of your entire existence. But before we explore that ultimate recognition, let me share what happens in the days and weeks immediately following your first genuine experience of quantum trust. Because once you've felt reality respond to consciousness in ways that defy conventional explanation, you enter what quantum physicists call the integration phase. And this phase determines whether your quantum awakening becomes a permanent transformation or just another interesting experience you file away in memory. The integration phase is where most people encounter their greatest resistance, not from external circumstances, but from their own nervous system. Your brain has spent decades building neural pathways based on classical physics assumptions. Matter is solid. Time moves in one direction. Cause and effect operate through mechanical processes. When quantum experiences challenge these assumptions, your nervous system can interpret the dissonance as danger. This is why some people have profound quantum breakthroughs, only to find themselves unconsciously sabotaging the results days later. Their conscious mind embraces the new possibilities, but their subconscious mind activates protective mechanisms designed to return them to familiar territory. The key to successful integration is understanding that this resistance isn't personal failure. It's biological programming that can be rewired through consistent quantum practice. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research on epigenetics reveals that beliefs literally reshape neural architecture. When you consistently operate from quantum principles rather than classical limitations, you're not just changing your thoughts. You're rewiring your brain at the cellular level to support quantum consciousness as your new baseline, rather than an occasional peak experience. But integration requires more than intellectual understanding or even consistent practice. It requires what I call quantum identity reconstruction. Most people try to add quantum abilities to their existing sense of self. They want to remain essentially the same person while occasionally accessing extraordinary possibilities. This approach creates internal contradiction because quantum consciousness isn't an ability you develop. It's a recognition of what you fundamentally are. Consider the case of Thomas, a financial advisor who experienced his first undeniable quantum manifestation when a client appeared seemingly out of nowhere with an investment opportunity that solved multiple problems simultaneously. The timing was so perfect, the circumstances so unlikely, that Thomas couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. He knew something beyond normal causality had orchestrated the encounter. Initially, Thomas was thrilled. He felt like he'd discovered a secret superpower that would revolutionize his business. But within weeks, doubt began creeping in. His rational mind generated explanations for what had happened. Maybe it was just good networking finally paying off. Perhaps he'd simply become more aware of opportunities that were always there. This doubt wasn't just intellectual skepticism. It was his identity trying to maintain coherence with its existing self-concept. Thomas had spent 40 years seeing himself as someone who succeeded through hard work, analysis, and conventional business strategies. Accepting that consciousness could directly influence external circumstances required fundamentally reconsidering who he was and how reality actually operates. The turning point came when Thomas realized he wasn't trying to add quantum abilities to his existing identity. He was discovering his actual identity beneath layers of conditioning that had taught him to see himself as separate from the creative intelligence that orchestrates all circumstances. This wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering what he'd always been before he learned to forget. This recognition shifted everything. Instead of trying to use quantum principles to enhance his business success, he began recognizing his business as one expression of quantum consciousness, exploring its creative potential. Instead of attempting to manifest better outcomes, he started embodying the awareness that creates all outcomes through its focused attention. The results were remarkable, but more importantly, they felt natural. Opportunities continued flowing, but Thomas no longer experienced them as external events happening to him. They felt like natural extensions of his own creative intelligence expressing itself through apparent external circumstances. This is what quantum identity reconstruction makes possible. You stop experiencing yourself as someone who occasionally accesses quantum phenomena and start recognizing yourself as quantum phenomena, becoming aware of its own creative process. The shift is subtle but revolutionary. It's the difference between using quantum mechanics and being quantum mechanics. But identity reconstruction inevitably triggers what quantum psychologists call the reality bridge phenomenon. As your sense of self expands to include quantum possibilities, you find yourself existing simultaneously in multiple versions of reality. Part of you continues navigating the classical world of mechanical causality, while another part operates from quantum principles of consciousness-created outcomes. This can feel disorienting initially. You might find yourself responding to situations from quantum awareness, while people around you operate from classical assumptions. Conversations become strange when you're speaking from infinite possibility, while others speak from limited probability. Relationships can feel strained when you're embodying creative consciousness, while others remain identified with reactive patterns. The bridge phenomenon isn't a problem to solve. It's a natural phase of quantum awakening that requires patience and compassion, both for yourself and others who haven't yet recognized their quantum nature. You're essentially learning to be bilingual, fluent in both classical and quantum realities, while gradually spending more time in quantum consciousness as your natural home. During this phase, you might notice that certain people and situations naturally fade from your experience while others emerge seemingly from nowhere. This isn't because you're becoming antisocial or superior. It's because quantum resonance naturally draws you toward people and circumstances that match your expanding frequency while creating distance from those that don't. Rachel discovered this during her own quantum awakening. As a corporate executive, she'd built her career around competitive achievement and strategic manipulation of circumstances. When quantum consciousness began emerging in her awareness, she initially tried to apply quantum principles within her existing professional framework, but the two approaches were fundamentally incompatible. Quantum consciousness operates through trust, alignment, and collaborative creation. Corporate strategy often relies on control, competition, and defensive positioning. The more authentically Rachel embodied quantum awareness, the more artificial her corporate environment felt. The bridge period was challenging. Rachel felt like she was living a double life, speaking the language of business strategy in meetings, while knowing that consciousness was actually creating all outcomes through invisible intelligence. She worried that fully embracing quantum consciousness would require abandoning her career and starting over in some completely different field. But quantum identity reconstruction doesn't require dramatic external changes unless your current circumstances are fundamentally misaligned with your authentic nature. More often, it transforms how you engage with existing situations. Rachel discovered she could remain in corporate environments while operating from entirely different principles. Instead of trying to control outcomes through strategic manipulation, she began aligning with the intelligence that orchestrates all business circumstances. Instead of competing with colleagues, she started collaborating with the consciousness that expresses itself through all individuals. Instead of defending against market forces, she began flowing with the creative intelligence that moves through all economic systems. The transformation was remarkable. Rachel's performance improved dramatically, but from entirely different motivations. She wasn't working harder or smarter in conventional terms. She was working from a completely different understanding of how success actually occurs. Her colleagues noticed the change, but couldn't identify what was different. She seemed more relaxed, yet more effective, less controlling, yet more influential. This is what the reality bridge phenomenon ultimately reveals. You don't need to abandon your external circumstances to embody quantum consciousness. You need to transform your relationship with those circumstances until they become expressions of your quantum nature rather than obstacles to it. But the bridge phase also reveals another crucial aspect of quantum awakening. As you expand into quantum consciousness, you begin attracting what quantum field theorists call resonance challenges. These are situations specifically designed to test whether your quantum understanding is genuine embodiment or just intellectual fascination. Resonance challenges often appear as circumstances that trigger your deepest fears or most ingrained patterns. They're not punishments or signs that you're doing something wrong. They're opportunities for quantum consciousness to demonstrate its capacity to remain coherent even when faced with situations that would normally activate reactive patterns. Michael encountered his resonance challenge when his quantum awakening coincided with his company's financial crisis. Just as he was beginning to experience reality as responsive to consciousness, external circumstances seemed to be collapsing around him. Employees were leaving, clients were cancelling contracts, and bankruptcy appeared inevitable. His initial response was panic. If consciousness really creates reality, what did this crisis say about his own mental state? Was he unconsciously manifesting failure? Should he abandon quantum principles and return to conventional problem-solving approaches? But resonance challenges aren't meant to be solved through classical methods or abandoned in favor of old approaches. They're meant to be navigated through deepening quantum trust rather than retreating from it. Michael realized that this crisis was actually an invitation to discover whether quantum consciousness could remain stable even in apparently dire circumstances. Instead of fighting the crisis or trying to control its resolution, Michael used it as an opportunity to practice ultimate quantum trust. He maintained coherent focus on his company's highest potential while allowing the current circumstances to unfold without resistance. He took practical action when inspired to do so, but without the desperate energy of someone trying to prevent disaster. The resolution came through a series of developments so unlikely that conventional business analysis couldn't explain them. A competitor offered an unexpected partnership that solved immediate cash flow problems. A former employee returned with a major client who had been looking for exactly the services Michael's company provided. An investor appeared who was specifically seeking businesses in transition rather than established enterprises. Each development felt miraculous from a classical perspective, but perfectly natural from quantum awareness. The crisis hadn't been a sign of failure or unconscious negative manifestation. It had been consciousness creating conditions for breakthrough that wouldn't have been possible through gradual improvement. This is what resonance challenges ultimately reveal. They're not obstacles to quantum awakening. They're accelerated evolution opportunities that compress years of gradual growth into intense periods of transformation. They test your commitment to quantum principles not by making them difficult to apply, but by creating circumstances where applying them requires absolute authenticity rather than partial commitment. When you navigate resonance challenges successfully, something profound shifts in your quantum confidence. You stop wondering whether consciousness really creates reality and start marveling at the creative intelligence that orchestrates even apparently negative circumstances to serve evolutionary purposes. You couldn't have imagined from limited perspectives. But successful navigation requires understanding what quantum physicists call the uncertainty principle as it applies to consciousness evolution. You cannot simultaneously know exactly where you are in your quantum development and exactly where you're going. Attempting to maintain complete certainty about outcomes actually interferes with quantum processes that require flexibility and openness to unexpected possibilities. This uncertainty isn't a flaw in quantum mechanics. It's a feature that prevents consciousness from limiting itself to outcomes it can imagine from current perspectives. When you trust uncertainty as an essential aspect of quantum creativity, rather than something to overcome, you gain access to possibilities that transcend anything your rational mind could plan or predict. The deepest level of quantum trust involves embracing uncertainty as the fertile void from which infinite possibilities emerge. Instead of trying to eliminate doubt, you learn to dance with it. Instead of demanding guaranteed outcomes, you celebrate the creative potential that exists within unknown territory. This is where quantum consciousness reveals its most profound secret. The goal isn't to gain control over reality through quantum principles. The goal is to discover yourself as the creative intelligence that reality uses to explore its own infinite potential. When this recognition becomes your lived experience rather than just an interesting concept, you've completed the integration phase and entered what quantum mystics call the embodiment dimension. In the embodiment dimension, quantum phenomena stop feeling miraculous and start feeling natural. Synchronicities become so common, you stop remarking on them. Desired outcomes manifest with such consistency that you begin taking conscious creation for granted. Reality becomes so responsive to your inner state that maintaining coherent consciousness becomes as automatic as breathing. But embodiment brings its own unique challenges and responsibilities. When you consistently demonstrate quantum consciousness in action, you naturally become a beacon for others who are ready to awaken to their own quantum nature. This isn't a role you choose or avoid. It's simply what happens when you embody authentic quantum awareness in a world where most people still operate from classical assumptions. The question becomes, how do you share quantum consciousness with others without trying to convince them of something they're not ready to understand? How do you demonstrate quantum possibilities without creating dependency or expectation? How do you remain authentic to your quantum nature while respecting others' current level of awareness? These questions lead us into the final frontier of quantum consciousness development, the recognition that individual quantum awakening is actually collective consciousness, remembering its own nature through apparently separate expressions. When you fully trust quantum physics at this level, you discover that there never were separate individuals having quantum experiences. There is only quantum consciousness exploring its infinite creativity through the appearance of multiple perspectives. This recognition transforms everything about how you understand your role in the collective awakening that's occurring on this planet. You're not just someone who's learned to apply quantum principles effectively. You're quantum consciousness itself, awakening to its own nature through the unique lens of your individual experience, while simultaneously awakening through countless other expressions across the globe. But before we explore that ultimate realization, you need to understand what happens when quantum trust becomes so complete that the boundary between your consciousness and the quantum field dissolves entirely. Because that's when the real adventure begins, and reality reveals possibilities that make everything we've discussed so far seem like elementary preparation for what consciousness is actually capable of creating when it stops pretending to be limited by the very laws it created to explore its own infinite nature. When you reach this level of quantum trust, where the boundaries between observer and observed begin dissolving, you enter what quantum consciousness researchers call the field state. This isn't just another level of awareness you achieve. It's the recognition that awareness itself has no edges, no limitations, no separation from the very reality it appears to be observing. Most people spend their entire lives believing their individual points of consciousness, looking out at an external world. But quantum field theory reveals something that will revolutionize your understanding of existence itself. There is no individual consciousness separate from a larger field. There is only one unified field of awareness appearing to fragment itself into billions of seemingly separate observers, each believing they're having their own private experience of reality. When this recognition moves from intellectual concept to lived experience, everything about your relationship with quantum phenomena transforms. You stop trying to use consciousness to influence the quantum field, because you realize consciousness is the quantum field, exploring its own creative potential through the lens of your apparently individual perspective. Dr. Nassim Haramein's research into the holographic principle reveals that every point in space contains information about the entire universe. This isn't just theoretical physics. It's a description of how consciousness actually operates. Your individual awareness isn't separate from universal awareness. It's universal awareness focusing itself through a specific point of observation while maintaining access to the information and creative capacity of the whole. When you truly absorb this understanding, when you feel it in your bones rather than just thinking about it, something extraordinary begins happening to your everyday experience. You start noticing that insights arrive not from your thinking process, but from somewhere much deeper and more intelligent. Solutions to problems appear fully formed in your awareness without any logical progression of thoughts. You find yourself knowing things you have no rational way of knowing. This isn't mystical fantasy. It's quantum consciousness recognizing its non-local nature. When you stop identifying as a separate individual trying to figure things out and start recognizing yourself as the intelligence that already knows everything, exploring itself through the experience of learning, you gain access to information and guidance that individual thinking could never provide. Consider what happened to Dr. Patricia Williams, a research scientist who was struggling with a complex environmental restoration project. Traditional approaches had failed for 3 years running. The ecosystem she was trying to heal showed no signs of recovery, despite implementing every method her scientific training suggested. The breakthrough came when Patricia stopped approaching the project as an individual scientist trying to solve an external problem and started recognizing herself as the same intelligence that created the ecosystem in the first place. Instead of analyzing the damaged environment from outside, she began feeling into it as an extension of her own being. This wasn't just a change in perspective. It was a fundamental shift in how she accessed information about the restoration process. Instead of relying solely on her accumulated knowledge and research data, she began receiving insights directly from the field state, where all information about ecosystem balance already exists. The solutions that emerged were unlike anything she'd encountered in scientific literature. They involved specific timing sequences based on lunar cycles, particular combinations of indigenous plants that hadn't been documented in restoration manuals, and intervention strategies that seemed to come from the ecosystem's own intelligence about what it needed to heal. When Patricia implemented these field-derived insights, the transformation was dramatic. The ecosystem began recovering at a rate that astonished her colleagues. Within 6 months, biodiversity returned, water quality improved, and natural balance restored itself in ways that conventional restoration science said should take decades. But the most remarkable aspect wasn't the external success. It was how natural the entire process felt once Patricia stopped trying to solve the problem from individual consciousness and started collaborating with the field intelligence that creates and maintains all ecosystems. The moment you recognize yourself as quantum consciousness, exploring its own infinite creativity through the lens of individual experience, reality stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you're actively participating in creating moment by moment. If this understanding is resonating deep in your being, if something within you is recognizing these truths as your own remembering, rather than new learning, then like this video and subscribe to stay connected with this frequency of quantum awakening. Your engagement helps these insights reach others who are ready to discover what they actually are beneath the illusion of separation from the creative force of existence itself.